What's up fam, my name is Tech, and if you're anything like me, you're a fan of necromancer characters in games. So when I saw Vex could create scythe-wielding minions, I had to try them out. For a build focused on Reapers, Dead Ringer has two capstones to pick from. The first is Grim Reaper, and while it is the more attractive option initially, it really augments status damage more than the Reapers, which is why I chose to focus on Dark Pact instead. The build itself is pretty simple, you really just want to focus on the right side of the tree as much as possible. In that first segment, Fell Inscriptions gives you and your Reapers more damage and survivability. Cursed Blades and Extra Curse gives you both on-hit damage when you mark enemies with melee attacks, and Grave Fiends boost all damage dealt on kill. If you're using this build to level, you'd put 4 points here and move on, but eventually you'll come back for the 5th. Next you'd be moving to the right segment and you want to grab Obedient Fiends and Ancient Rites on the way to Dark Pact. Both are passives that boost minion damage and Dark Pact is your capstone. It allows you to slot in 2 augments and gives you a command that fully heals your minions while boosting their attack and move speed. It feels like this was intended to be the middle ground capstone for if you wanted to be able to use both Spectres and Reapers effectively, as it allows you to take 2 augments and the segment also has a gun damage perk, but in my opinion it just seems better to take 2 augments that focus on one or the other. So because of that, we're taking Banshee's Will and Hellish Harvest. Banshee's Will makes the Reapers do an AoE when spawned and every 20 seconds that deals damage, gives allies overshield, and reduces enemy damage dealt by a third on hit. You mainly want this for the extra bit of damage and the overshield it gives, plus Coven only gives health regen when spawning Reapers, which is not as helpful. Hellish Harvest allows the Reapers to spin, dealing melee damage 3 times while giving themselves 15% of their max health back on hit. They will do this when spawned and every 3 of their normal melee attacks. This deals solid damage while allowing the Reapers to stay alive through most fights as long as there's enemies to hit. Back to the perks, I like Denier for the extra charge of Dead Ringer here before going into the middle segment taking Recurrence. Recurrence boosts your gun and melee damage whenever you deal damage with guns or melee. Then you want to take Haruspex and Pincushion, which replaces your regular melee with a fan of daggers that deal high damage, can crit, and refund every 3 kills. Next you should take Reverberations to give you and your Reapers a chance to deal bonus incendiary damage on hit, which makes you very effective against flesh no matter what element you're attuned to. Finally, you can put that 5th point into Grave Fiends and then you have about 6 points to work with. Initially, I had them split between Spirit Bomb and Death Follows Closer. Both I think were okay, but they both had some issues. Spirit Bomb is cool in theory, but in this build your Reapers rarely ever die unless you resummon them or they run out of targets to hit, in which case the bomb is useless. Death Follows Closer is good utility while leveling or before you've got all your gear, because oftentimes when you go down it'll spawn a Reaper that'll go kill a target, which will save you. But in this game, more often than not, killing things before they can kill you is better, and for 3 points of investment, its lowest cooldown is 80 seconds, which is a really long time for most bosses. I tried a few different perks here, but what felt the best so far was either Burnt Offering or Burn Attunement. The crit damage bonus from Burning Attunement is very good, but I prefer not to tie down my attunement with this particular build, even though most of the time I'm using incendiary weapons. You can also go 5 into Blood is Magic under the Face Familiar tree for 30% action skill damage at full health. I haven't tried it myself, but I've seen it suggested and it should be a good bump to your Reaper's damage. I prefer Burnt Offering as you'll always be doing some incendiary damage on melee attacks, and the damage increase is pretty significant with your melee damage focus. And I usually put the last point into Blood Sacrifice. You really only have 1 kill skill, but it ends up being about a 37% increase to all damage, which is something you want up all the time, and this helps do that. I also tried taking out Reverberations and Burnt Offering to try 11 points in Incarnate or Face Familiar, but there isn't really anything significant you can get in this build for only 11 points. If you wanted to get good value out of either of those trees, you'd also need to take out Haruspex, which makes Cursed Blades less effective, and at that point you're kind of moving towards some other kind of build. Moving on to gear, I don't really plan to talk about the guns a whole lot because you're not doing that much gun damage. I'll start off by saying I have tried the crit throwing knife, and while it is very good with this build, that makes nearly any build broken, which takes the fun out of buildcraft for me. Plus it seems like it'll get nerfed at some point in the future. So with that being said, the first thing you really want to make this build shine is Slippy. Slippy is the fish grenade that deals melee damage, which is all of what we're about here. With all your melee bonuses, it'll one-shot most adds and chunk bosses. All the drops I've seen of it are kinetic, but it also triggers Reverberations, which makes it good against all targets and especially deadly against fleshy targets. The generic augments on it don't matter a whole lot, but the one I have has Nuke on it, which makes it much more damaging. Next, you'll want an Illusionist class mod, which gives you a chance to spawn badass versions of Reapers and Spectres. They have higher max health and damage dealt. The mod usually also comes with less phase clone health loss over time, which adds to the Reapers rarely dying. For your shield, you'll want a Heavyweight. This comes with the perk Bare Knuckle, which consumes an armor segment on melee hit to increase melee damage by 100%, and while armor is empty, it increases melee damage by 50%. I don't believe the first part applies to the Reaper's attacks, but it does apply to both Slippy and your melee damage, and it's a significant bump to damage. Plus, with Banshee's Will, you're periodically getting overshield, so you can afford to have your shield empty often. Two perks to look out for on either this shield or others are Boxer, which gives the same effect as Heavyweight's first part, or Berserker, which gives melee damage while shields are empty. I don't think Berserker can roll on Heavyweight as its description mentions Energy Shield, but it is a good perk nonetheless. Your rep kit doesn't need to be super specific, but you want Hard Hitter, which boosts melee damage for a duration on use. Enrage is also a good addition for extra damage. A triple bypass is a generally good option because of its 3 charges and refund on kill, which gives you high uptime on Hard Hitter. Your enhancement is purely up to preference since they primarily buff your guns, but you just really want the right firmware on them. And speaking of firmware, you want to be grabbing anything that has Action Fist and Real Big Fist. I mostly run 3 in Action Fist and 2 in Real Big Fist. 2 in the latter and 1 in the former combine for 55% melee damage, and the other 2 points in Action Fist give up to 35% action skill damage on kill, which buffs your Reapers. I've tried 3 in Real Big Fist and is very good for mobbing, but in theory seems hard to rely on for boss damage since you can't really guarantee your Reapers will kill adds near bosses. Plus your Reapers will be completely fine killing adds without the extra Nova. For specializations, the bulk of your points will be put into Runner and Daredevil, with points into Sharpshooter just to access Daredevil. The 4 perks I've gotten the most use out of are Bare Arms, I Am a Gun, Hone Mine, and Groundbreaker. The first 2 are kinda just icing on the cake. They give 50% of gun damage boosts as melee and action skill damage respectively. And while you don't have a lot of gun damage boosts, you get at least 40% from the 50 recurrent stacks, which should give 20 to both melee and action skills. A Honed Mine is generically good, as it allows the Reapers to crit occasionally. Groundbreaker is where it gets busted. It effectively stores a portion of any damage you deal and consumes it on melee attacks that deal ridiculous damage. I originally thought it should work with Vex's phase daggers, but that doesn't feel like it's the case. It seemingly only works on her basic melee attack. This allows you to potentially hit for millions of damage on single melee attacks, and with Reverberations you have a 50% chance to deal an additional 150% damage as Incendiary, which will melt any flesh boss. And if you happen to ignite with the same attack that procs Groundbreaker, the status damage will scale off that millions of damage. Admittedly, this interaction is probably also going to be looked at when they check out the crit knife, but since this is specific for melee and everyone has access to it without having to farm, I thought it was important to add. Outside of those 4, there are a couple other interesting options. Now with Caffeine is a good choice for more uptime on your action skill. While you don't have that much downtime on your Reapers, it can help with immune phases if you aren't quite killing fast enough, or when you are killing too fast it can help you keep them up between each farming respawn. CQC could be decent because you're always dealing melee damage, but it's unlikely you'll be putting points into that tree until you're pretty drunk with specialization points. And Tripwire is cool in theory because you have multiple charges of your action skill, but it suffers from the same problem as the last perk, but even worse. In terms of playstyle, for mobbing you generally want to drop a Reaper or 2 in the middle of an area and then pop Dark Pact if the enemy density is high or if you'll be in a particular place for a long time. If you're running a specific route, like toward the Ripper Queen's throne, you can drop 1 in each room where the ads spawn, and then on the 3rd Reaper you can use Dark Pact and they will clean up most enemies on your way through. For bosses, you want to start by dropping all 3 Reapers at once, then Dark Pact, followed by your rep kit for melee damage from Hard Hitter, and then throw your daggers and both Slippy charges. Fire your gun until the Slippy stop bouncing, and then go melee the boss and you should chunk them. As the build currently is, it has pretty much no issues mobbing at all. For bosses it does much better damage against flesh targets, but it can still do well against armor and shields. It also does much better against flying targets than most other melee builds because the Reapers and your daggers can hit airborne enemies, but a lot of your damage does come from Slippy and Groundbreaker, which can struggle against flyers. If you like this video, please drop a like, it would be much appreciated. I've been thinking about doing a build with each capstone in the game, and I've even got a few ideas about a Dark Pact build focusing on Spectres, so if either of those sounds cool to you, please drop a comment to let me know. Later fam.